Hi everyone, this is Jim. In this video we're continuing to look at the games that I played in the 2015 US Open. We're at round 3 already and I'm at 50%, 1 win and 1 loss. My opponent here is one of the top women juniors in the US, 14 or 15 years old and with a rating of 2,066, whereas my rating for the tournament is 1,793, so almost a 300-point rating difference. But it could have been an interesting game. Let's see. This is actually the worst game I played in the tournament, so maybe I won't dwell on it too much. But interesting to see where I go wrong. So we start out with the French defense. And she plays the Tarrasch. Very respectable line. And now here's my first slightly dubious decision. In the past, in tournament games, I've always played the move c5, and that's what I'm most familiar with, that line. But the second choice here, and that's the top choice, but the second choice here is knight to f6, going after the center, putting pressure on the center and encouraging the pawn to move forward, and then the knight drops back here, and you get a typical French setup with a closed pawn chain, whereas the c5 move leads to more of an open position, sometimes with the isolated queen's pawn. Both interesting ways to play, and I just tried this move out a bit recently, this knight f6 move, in some blitz games, but I had never played it in a tournament game before, but I felt like trying it here for some reason. And so that's the first mistake, I think. And my advice to anybody who asks, by the way, is that, if you're playing in a tournament, particularly one where you want to try and get a good result, is not to change up your openings, but just to play the stuff you're most familiar with. That will give you the best chances. So a bit of a lark to play this move knight f6. The flip side of that is, when you're playing a strong player and you want to test out a new opening, well, there's your chance. They will demonstrate what's wrong with your understanding of the opening. Anyway, knight f6, e5. This is all normal stuff. Knight fd7 gets kicked back. Bishop d3, good developing move, and now c5. So you've waited to play c5 until you're in a position to take back with the knight, and also you've encouraged this pawn to come forward, and maybe it'll become a target later. So it is an entirely reasonable way to play. c3, defending the pawns over here, is a normal way to play. Knight c6, putting more pressure on the center. Knight e2. This looks funny, but in fact this is a standard idea in the Tarrasch French. This knight, which started over here on on b1, is going to come all the way over to f3, and this knight, which normally goes to f3, is going to hop into f4. And those knights are put a lot of pressure on the center, and particularly this e-pawn. So keep that thought in mind. Let's see, what did I play here? I played takes, which actually is the main move. I'm improvising at this point. I'm out of my understanding of the theory. And then right here, the main move is pawn to f6. And like I said, I'm out of my knowledge of theory, so I'm just improvising. I played bishop e7, thinking that I was preparing the move f6. White castled, and I played f6 here. And actually f6 right at this point is a huge blunder. So what she could have played here, it didn't play actually, so the game continued after this, but she could have played knight f4 here, and that would just win the game. The problem is knight is putting pressure, well, it's threatening to take the e6 pawn, and there's no good way to defend it. You don't really want to play a move like king to f7 there, and the queen check is probably going to be devastating anyway. But also notice the bishop is trained on this square, so there's quite a pileup of pieces here that white has ready to jump into the attack at this point, all because of this misplayed f6 move. Now what I had planned, I actually had considered that she might play knight f4 and attack this pawn, and I thought, well, then I can grab the e-pawn, because that knight on e2 was defending the d-pawn. I thought I could just take the d-pawn and defend here, but in fact this defense doesn't work. The knight can be undermined with knight b3, and now I'm in a terrible situation here. If I okay, the top move actually by the chess engine is actually to sacrifice the piece here by playing knight takes e5, and then knight takes d4, and white's a piece up, and there's still pressure on the e-pawn. So that's the losing but best continuation. If you take the knight, try and gain a tempo that way, knight takes, then queen h5 check comes in here, and if the king goes to f8, then the knight takes e6 with a nasty fork, so certainly that's winning. Let's see, after queen h5 check, if you try to block it with g6, putting the pawn up here, this loses to the sacrifice on g6. Take with the bishop, and once again, if you try to move the king away, then knight takes here with check and win the queen. So you take the bishop, and then let's see, yeah, it's queen takes g6, right? The king only has one move, and the knight takes e6 is checkmate. So a quick end to that game. So that's why the best option black has at this point after knight f4 is actually to, well, knight f4, knight takes d4 is still the best choice, but you're losing a piece after knight b3, knight takes b3. So fortunately for me, after knight b3 and knight takes e5 rather, going into this line and giving up a piece is the best I could hope for at this point. Fortunately for me, after f6, she just took. And it's not like she was moving quickly. She was actually thinking about each move quite a bit. It's kind of interesting. And then later in the game, she started moving a little faster, but she's really spending a lot of time. So maybe she was trying to calculate that out and didn't quite see all of the variations there working out in her favor. So she just went with the exchange. I took back with the knight, and now the game continues. This is not such a bad position. It's kind of typical. What you're playing for is maybe some counter pressure on the f-file after you castle, and you have a weakness here on e6 that white can go after. So knight f3, continuing normal development. I castle, bishop g5, play bishop to d7, getting my other piece out. Rook to e1. I wasn't sure about this move, but it turns out okay. I was thinking, taking the rook's eye off of that f-pawn might give me some chances, but this bishop can always drop back and defend, and we see that happening shortly. Actually, I play knight to h5 expecting her to exchange, but actually she kept the pieces on and played this bishop move. And black is about equal here. I've actually gotten an okay position. Let's see, I continue with bishop d6. She plays queen d2. And now I play the move e5. This is one of those moves that's kind of strategically desirable because it's dissolving this weakness. It's opening things up. I felt like, well, I've have enough of my pieces developed that opening things up is not too bad for me. But of course, you have to back up that kind of decision with concrete calculation. And I do have some weaknesses here. I have a loose knight over here on h5, which is a bit out of the action. And after some exchanges on e5, I'll end up with a loose piece here on e5. So I'll have a couple of loose pieces in that position. And I was aware of that, but I didn't see any great way for white to exploit that, and I wanted to go ahead and push with e5. But I had a very respectable alternative here, and maybe a way for me to get a slight edge in this position. And something I wanted to bring up just because it's a useful kind of thematic move. Now that the f-file is open, I could consider sacrificing the exchange here on f3. So rook takes f3, pawn takes, and then the queen gets into the game very quickly. Queen to h4. The knight's already over here. It sort of makes sense of this knight position on h5. So this is mainly possible because of this retreating move with the bishop. That probably wasn't best, and she probably should have just traded. But if I had found this move, knight to g3, knight to f4, then this forces some exchanges. Now I've got threats of coming here and mating. So this actually leads to an okay position for, I can take with the bishop here. Bring another piece in, hit the queen. And then rook to f8, bring the other rook. So I'm still down the exchange, and the material otherwise is even. There's the same number of pawns, so I don't have a pawn for the exchange. But I do have really active pieces set up to jump in, and so probably enough compensation for the exchange and might lead to an interesting game. And that would be the best way for me to play. I think the engine gives a slight edge to black or about even, something like that. Okay, so after the move e5, which is what I played instead, I'm actually a little bit worse here. So she exchanged, d takes, knight takes, knight takes, bishop takes. Yeah, this is the position I was talking about where I have a couple of loose pieces. And there's other weaknesses in my in my position as well. Actually, these pawns are loose. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of problematic about my position, even though the material is even. And so if you want to pause the video and think about what you would play as white here, she makes a pretty instructive move, I think. Okay, I'm going to give the answer. She played the move queen to b4, eyeing this pawn over here, which is undefended, and also with ideas of swinging the queen out along this row here, this rank, the fourth rank. So I thought about different moves. I considered the move queen f6 for a long time. Here, we'll come back to that move. And eventually I decided I didn't like it, and I thought, well, I'll just kind of defend things over here, shore up a couple of my weaknesses, and see. I didn't see any way that the queen could really exploit the fact that there are still two loose pieces here. I did realize when I played bishop c6 that I was giving up this square here, the g4 square. And in fact, she played queen g4 immediately, but it's only attacking one of my pieces, or so I thought. And so I just retreated the knight, and she played queen here, check. And I resigned because that's a check and it hits my other loose piece, so I end up losing a piece. So that's how the game ended. So let's back up and replay that. So first of all, I wanted to point out that very nice, there was 3 queen moves in a row, a very nice queen maneuver. Queen here, queen here, queen there. A nice little zigzag to move the queen from this square to this square, where it delivers this devastating check. So the queen here decoyed my, encouraged my bishop to move away from the defense of this diagonal. Then the queen hops on this diagonal with tempo because it hits the knight, and then when I drop back, the check there wins a piece. So nice maneuver from white there. Okay, after queen b4, I really did spend a long time thinking about this move queen to f6, and I'll show you what might have happened here. After queen f6, I thought she could just take the pawn, and then I would play bishop to c6. This was the idea, is trying to just give up the pawn, have active pieces, and maybe get some pressure on the f file. But notice the f2 pawn is securely defended by the bishop, and then the queen could just move to a6 here, getting away from the attack. And you know, this bishop here is somewhat awkwardly placed. It's on c6, but it's kind of suspended in midair. It's only defended by my queen, and so white can easily put more pressure on it. So I didn't really think in this position I had enough compensation for the pawn. And the chess engine agrees. Of course, what I didn't realize at the time is that I'm already worse after this queen b4 move. So everything is going to be a little bit worse. And this queen f6 idea may have been one of the better alternatives. The chess engine thinks actually the top choice here is to play the move a5, kicking the queen. So a5, queen takes b7, and then knight to f6, bringing the knight back, defending this pawn. So I still have one loose piece, but the queen here is not in a position to exploit it. So just giving up a pawn. But well, now I do have some activity here with my pieces. They're a little better placed than in the other line, and I can play on white still better. Okay, so after queen b4, bishop c6, queen g4 hitting the knight. Of course, I don't have to play knight to g4 there. I could try a move like queen to e8. And queen to e8 defends both these pieces, but has a pretty passive move, and white is just better in this position. But that's what I should have played to continue the game. Anyway, so a short game, but I thought a bit instructive. Let's take a look at my 4th round game. And in this game I had the white pieces. So we're continuing this pattern where I have the black pieces against strong players and the white pieces against weak players. My opponent in this round was rated 1595, an experienced player. And let's see, I kicked off with d4 here. He played knight f6. And he plays an unusual opening, which I'm actually pretty familiar with since I see this in Blitz quite a bit, d5, the martial defense. So I went ahead and took, and he took back with the knight. And now I played the move e4, so I should know better, actually. It's a bit more precise to play the move knight f3 first to prevent any kind of nonsense with e5, and then you play you can play e4 on the next move. If after knight f3, bishop to f4 is played, let's erase this arrow. Let's put this on. If I play knight f3, and he puts his bishop out here, what you can do is play knight to d2, threatening this fork, gaining a tempo, and then after the bishop moves, you play e4 anyway. So you always gain that tempo. So you're getting in that e4 move regardless. You don't need to play it right here. So that's why knight f3 is a little more precise. Anyway, I kick the knight immediately with e4. The knight drops back to f6. And this is exactly the line where he's putting pressure on the e-pawn, so I have to pause for another moment to defend it. And right here, this is where black can play e5 and get some kind of compensation. So it's not totally lost. But after his move, he just played e6 here, and white is just better in this position. Let's see. Well, let's take a look at the e5 line. After e5. Taking right away and allowing the queen trade isn't so great, but continuing to develop is possible. E takes, knight takes, and bishop c5. And yeah, the material is about even. Black's material is even, and black is managing to get some development going. And yeah, black is okay here, not going to lose immediately. Okay, so he played e6, and in this position, it's just a very comfortable edge for white, with the extra space. And I thought this was kind of an instructive game that I played, showing how to take advantage of this space that you have. So just development for a while. Knight f3, goes bishop e7. I think these are all normal moves. Bishop d3. I'm going to place my pieces on this diagonal and go for a kingside attack. Very typical strategy in these queen pawn openings. He castles right away, so I know where his king is located. I castle. Goes knight bd7. Probably not best, but well, he doesn't want to block the c-pawn, which is understandable. So maybe pushing the c-pawn forward first, and then knight to c6 would be a better way to play it. But knight bd7 anyway was played. I dropped this bishop back to c2. I'm planning to put my queen on d3. He goes rook e8. And I follow through with my plan. Now we see the point of this knight to d2 move. He plays knight to f8. So he saw this attack coming, and he prepared for it with this knight f8 move. And that's a solid defense. I can no longer really follow through with my plan of pushing the pawn and taking on h7. Things are just held together there. So I need to develop my bishop. I was thinking this would be a good square. And so what I wanted to do was make sure after bishop to f4 that on knight h5 I had a retreat for the bishop. So I throw in this move h3. So what I'm doing is I'm preparing bishop f4. He played h6, taking control of some squares around his king. Although maybe he could have used another developing move or some counterattacking move in the center. Probably would have been better at that point. Okay, I go bishop f4. And he doesn't go knight to h5, but if he did, I would just drop back the bishop to h2. Instead, he played c6. So he's not going for any kind of active counterplay, but he's got a very solid setup here and just saying, okay, there's no way that I can push through in the center. I didn't see an immediate plan, so I start piling up on the c file with ideas. Eventually, if nothing changes on the king side, what I can do is launch a queenside pawn storm and go after some weaknesses, create some weaknesses on the queenside pawns. But he obliges by creating a bit of a weakness here with b6. Creates a weak c-pawn. His idea is to develop his bishop here on this diagonal, which is just, well, it's just a little bit slow, and like I said, it creates some pawn weaknesses. The chess engine right here is recommending knight to g6. And after knight to g6, bishop to h2. You know, white is still better, but because of the extra space, but there's no immediate attacking things going on. It's just a slightly better continuation. So anyway, he played b6. Right here, the chess engine recommends that I should play knight to e5 already, jumping in here with the knight and hitting this pawn. So let's take a look at this variation. Knight e5, hitting the c-pawn. The c-pawn comes forward, and then knight jumps into c6. I didn't notice this at all, but this is a pretty clever way to take advantage of his lack of development. He, pushed the b pawn forward in order to develop his bishop, but I played all those moves with tempo, and he never really had time to get his bishop out. And now after the queen moves, I can grab his good bishop here, the dark squared bishop, and then take here. And so I eliminate one of his strong pieces, and I also mess up his queenside pawns. So that would be best continuation for me here. But the move I played was okay. I just continued my development, rook f to d1. And now he responds to this with bishop to b7, continuing his development plan. And so I make the first kind of interesting move here. I decide that there's nothing going on this diagonal, and that it's a bit uncomfortable that if this pawn ever gets exchanged, then the queens are facing each other. So I move the queen one move to the side. So this opens up a line from my rook to his queen, so whenever I take something with my d-pawn, then it comes with tempo. And it also sets up potential ideas of a sacrifice on h6, so kind of a small move with the queen. Okay, here he played knight 6 to h7, so he's going to try and rearrange his pieces over here on the king side. I go knight e2, bringing my knight over to the king side. He goes knight to g5, wanting to provoke some exchanges. And if I just trade things off, that probably helps him. So I'm going to keep the advantage in space and not help him relieve his cramped position by trading, but instead play knight to e5, which, as we saw earlier, that seems to be a good outpost for the knight. Anyway, it's putting some pressure on c6. It's defended now, so it's not coming with tempo, so it would have been better earlier. But it's also putting pressure on f7, which, because his rook has been moved out of the way to make room for the knight, f7 is a bit of a weakness in this position. So here he found nothing better than to play knight g back to h7. The chess engine at this point is recommending already playing f6 and chasing the knight away. But, well, that's the kind of move I'm hoping to provoke, and now I've got two pawn weaknesses to go after. Okay, but in the game he moved his knight back to h7, and I played bishop to a4. So couldn't see anything immediately I could do on the king side, but I can pile up on some of these weaknesses here. I've got two pieces attacking that, and he's got to defend it. He plays b5, and the bishop drops back to b3. Also taking a look at this diagonal, and with maybe ideas at some point of sacrificing on f7. So that's a good diagonal for the bishop. He goes queen to b6 here, and right now, actually, there is an opportunity to play a strong move. So there's an attacking move that White has here that I didn't play, but if you want to pause the video and look, I've already mentioned this idea previously, but see if you can find the idea right here. Okay, right here, there's an opportunity to sacrifice on h6. So if I take, and he takes back, the queen comes in with check. Here, g3, sorry. This is what you had to see. You can't come to this square, and grabbing the pawn didn't lead to anything. So that was what I was calculating. Takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and then I didn't see any follow-up. But instead of taking with the pawn, bring the queen over here. And notice that if the king goes to the corner, knight takes f7 is checkmate. that f7 pawn is completely undefended when the king is no longer in touch with it. And the king has no square, so knight takes f7 is checkmate after the king moves. So that means knight g5 to block the check is one of the only moves here. Yeah, maybe you could have tried the other knight too, but in any case, you win the piece back with h4. This was the top line of the chess engine, and I guess if he brings the other knight in, you're going to exchange off and come in with the queen, and that will be devastating as well. So anyway, that bishop takes h6. That would have been that. This moment in the game was my opportunity to play that sacrifice. But well, like I said, I was calculating bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and that doesn't really lead to so much. So not seeing that idea, I played queen to f3, another creeping queen move. So the queen has gone from d3 to e3 to f3. But this comes with some nice threats too, because now I'm looking at this f7 pawn with the queen and the knight. So it also got my queen off of this diagonal, so once again I can move the e-pawn forward without trading queens. So a couple of ideas there. He plays f6 finally. A reluctant decision. He didn't want to play that, but he felt he needed to get rid of the knight. I play a clever move here. Okay, so I finally spot a tactic. So see if you can find a clever move for white in this position. Okay, I'll give the answer away. I played knight d7, and the idea here is that if he takes, then bishop takes on e6 as a fork, hits the king and gets the knight back. So immediate material gain. So this is pretty, I think, an instructive way to play. First of all, I was creating lots of threats early on in the game, which puts my opponent in a defensive mindset, and then I play this tactic that he's not expecting, and so that has the effect of unnerving your opponent a little bit. So there's a bit of a psychological warfare going on here. Let's see, the queen is under attack. He can't take the knight, so he just drops the queen back, which is the best move. And then the knight gets this nice perch on c5. That was one of the ideas here. It can't stay on d7, unfortunately, and contribute to a further attack, but that's a good square for it. And now black really needs to trade that knight off. That's the suggested move here. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen to c8, defending this pawn. And then says I should push on with e5 here. That's the chess engine line. Still with a good attack, but black can try and defend that position. Let's see. He played bishop to c8 immediately because now the knight and the bishop are coordinating on this pawn on e6 once again, so he drops the bishop back. And of course that's what I want to see. It's more pieces put on the back row. And I choose this moment. The chess engine says actually I could have played the move queen g3 here, I guess with the idea of threatening to take on h6, and that was the top choice. That would have been a nice continuation, because if the earlier creeping queen moves, I went from d3 to e3 to f3, and now I could go to g3. So the queen could visit all of those squares in turn, make an interesting game. But I saw this move d5, and I think this is just winning. And it's also very typical. You get all your pieces developed, you play some moves that force your opponent back into a defensive posture, and then you open things up. And because your pieces are better developed, things are just going to turn out in your favor. And there's no good response here to this d5 move. He tried c takes d5. I take with the e-pawn. Let's see. He doesn't want to keep taking because this goes with check, and I pick up the rook in the corner. So also this rook again pin against the queen is unfortunate. So it's not a pin, but it's a threat on the queen. So I move the queen out of the way with an attack on the knight. But this move d6, first of all, it interrupts the attack on the knight, so now the knight is safe, and it comes with a double attack because it attacks the bishop and it attacks the rook in the corner. And so that's how the active pieces come through when things are opening up. There's just no defense. He dropped his bishop back here. I took the rook in the corner, and he resigned at this point. So I thought a nice game. So I played a horrible game in round 3 and a pretty good game in round 4. So continuing this pattern of winning, losing, winning, losing. So I'm even with 2 points out of 4 after 4 rounds, and I'll continue with more coverage of my games from the US Open soon. So see you then. Bye.